Welcome to day 3 of the George Washington University Law School Nuclear Energy Conference. I am Dan Stenger, a partner with the law firm of Hogan Lovells in Washington, D.C., and I'm a GW Law alumnus, class of 1980. On the first day of the conference, we had heard a lot of discussion about how to make nuclear energy investable through the lens of environmental and societal norms these days through the ESG perspective. And then yesterday on day 2, there was a lot of discussion about some of the challenges facing new nuclear development, including the need to rebuild the supply chain of equipment, engineering, and everything, construction and everything else needed to execute a nuclear energy project. This morning, we're going to hear an in-depth discussion about America's nuclear energy future from Steve Nesbit, who is president of the American Nuclear Society and formerly of Duke Energy, one of the leading nuclear energy companies. First, before we get into our program, I wanted to give a historical perspective for the benefit of people. Donna Antanasio circulated a few days ago some historical plaques that are around George Washington University. And one of those, they're both very significant, but I will focus on one, which is for Dr. Edward Teller. He was a pioneer of atomic physics, one of the leading atomic physicists of the 20th century. And Dr. Teller was a professor at GW from 1935 to 1945. He was a Hungarian by birth, emigrated to the United States. He was one of the atomic physicists who emigrated from Hungary in those days. And he's known popularly as the father of the hydrogen bomb. Now, he never used that title for himself, but that's what people called him in the press, the father of the hydrogen bomb. When World War II started in around 1939, 1940, Dr. Teller understood, because he had studied and worked in Germany, he understood that the Nazis were working on an atomic weapons program. And Dr. Teller became part of the Manhattan Project in those days. And I heard an interview on the radio with Dr. Teller not too long ago, and he told a fascinating story that I had never known. But at that time, the United States government was not really geared towards any type of atomic weapons program, but he knew that it was essential to the survival of the West. And he and another colleague made a trip to Long Island, where Albert Einstein had a summer home. And they went to this small town on Long Island. And of course, in those days, there was no navigation on the cars, but they stopped a young girl on the street and said, do you happen to know where the elderly gentleman with the crazy hair lives? And she said, oh yes, right up this street. So they found Albert Einstein there, and they convinced him of the need to send a letter to President Franklin Roosevelt about the need to begin an atomic weapons program. And it sounded as though Teller was responsible for at least a first draft authoring that letter, but Albert Einstein did send that letter. Many of you may be familiar with that letter. It's on display at the National Archives in Washington, permanent display in the case with the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, so one of the most important letters ever written. And that really launched the Manhattan Project. And Dr. Teller went to the secret, Los Alamos Laboratory in New Mexico to work on the nuclear weapons program. While he was there, the focus at Los Alamos, this is an interesting technical sidelight, the focus of the program was on developing an atom bomb, which would work through splitting uranium atoms uranium being one of the heaviest elements. But Dr. Teller's real focus was actually on nuclear fusion. He was an expert on studying the power of the sun and the stars and the atomic makeup of lighter atoms such as hydrogen. And he knew that fusing two lighter hydrogen atoms could actually produce a much greater amount of energy and yield than an atomic weapon. And he actually focused on the nuclear fusion. And after World War II, he turned his focus to that effort because he was aware that the Soviet Union was trying to develop similar weapons, and he knew the United States and the West needed to stay ahead of the Soviets. So he continued work on the hydrogen bomb or thermonuclear weapon. And he developed the concept of using radioactivity. This is the way the hydrogen bomb worked, to use the radioactivity from an atomic explosion to provide the compression and the heat necessary to cause fusion of hydrogen atoms to occur in the hydrogen bomb. And that was successfully demonstrated in the atoll in the South Pacific. And it's just interesting because it just shows you this is one of the greatest physicists in history and was a very important figure. And he was a professor at GW during those years from 1935 to 1945, those crucial years. In his latter days, Teller passed away in 2003, I believe. He was asked about the future and possibility of fusion energy as opposed to fission. The nuclear power plants that operate around the world today operate based on fission, splitting uranium atoms. And Teller, interestingly enough, answered that he thought fission could do it all, that fission energy was all that was really necessary. And now today, in the last maybe 15 years, there have been significant breakthroughs in nuclear fusion, driven in part by better computer simulation capability, high-speed conductors and electronics and things like that that can make some of the technology necessary for the extremely high heat. We're talking hundreds of millions of degrees Fahrenheit and high compression within the fusion devices. There have been breakthroughs in those areas, and so fusion energy is somewhat on the horizon. So it'd be interesting to know how what Dr. Teller would think about fusion energy today. Be equally interesting to hear what Steve Nesbit may need to say. So with that historical perspective, I hope that's somewhat helpful to you if you visit the GW campus. I'm not quite sure. I believe I've seen the plaque for Teller. I'm not quite sure where it is, but you can find it around campus. So one of the most important scientific figures of the age was a GW professor. So moving on then, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker for day 3, Steve Nesbit, who's president of the American Nuclear Society, who will focus on the breadth and depth of America's nuclear energy future. And we couldn't ask for a better speaker on that topic because Steve has a distinguished career with Duke Energy Corporation, which is one of the leading nuclear energy companies and has been for decades here in the United States. Duke owned and operated an original fleet of 7 nuclear reactors. Steve founded, after leaving Duke Energy, Steve founded his own consulting firm, LMNT Consulting, in 2019. And he supports clients on matters related to the nuclear fuel cycle, advanced nuclear energy systems, and nuclear nonproliferation issues. Steve began his career at Duke Energy in 1982, performing safety analyses in support of nuclear power plants. And between 1996 and 2005, Steve led Duke Energy's efforts related to the use of what's called mixed oxide, or MOX, fuel in nuclear power reactors as part of the Department of Energy project to dispose of surplus plutonium from nuclear weapons. MOX fuel operates from taking the plutonium from nuclear weapons that have been dismantled and downblended, and using that plutonium with uranium to make the mixed oxide fuel that can be used in commercial nuclear power plants. So Steve knows in depth the ins and outs of the nuclear power industry, and we'll be able to share some interesting perspectives on the future of nuclear energy in the United States. So Steve, the floor is yours. You're ready to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan, for that kind introduction. And also, people who know me know that I'm a history buff, so I really appreciate the stories on Teller and others. So it's a great lead into the discussion here. I will say, before I get into my prepared remarks, that I think nuclear fusion is a very exciting area as we see private companies, getting into what was previously an area that was really only addressed by governments. And I think if you think about what's happened with space technology and SpaceX and that kind of thing, maybe that's a sign of things to come in the nuclear fusion area as well. So look forward to addressing the group today. I'm going to put up on the screen some slides and go through those as I proceed with my remarks. Hopefully, it will be both informative and stimulating. I look forward to getting some questions from you and responding to those at the end of the discussion. So it is my privilege to kick off today, day 3 of George Washington Law's Conference on Investable Nuclear Energy. I guess before I get too far down the road, I should ask, can everybody see my slides and hear me well?
We can see them, but they are not full screen.
Really? Oh, okay.
We're seeing this main slide and then the next slide. Yeah, it's working a little differently than it did before.
All right. Let me fix that. I'm glad I asked. So I think we can go back and start over and get that working. So let's see about this and that. How about that?
Not yet.
Well, one more try. I think I know what the problem was. Let's try that. And
just go full screen now, and I think we'll get it. Yes.
Okay. Good. Always good to check before you launch in here. So it is my privilege to kick off day 3 of George Washington Law's Conference on Investable Nuclear Energy. Day 1 focused on assessing the past and present, and day 2 provided a look ahead at the potential landscape for the future of nuclear energy. Here on day 3, we'll identify challenges and solutions to fulfilling the promise of a nuclear power industry that is attractive to investors and holds the public trust. In workshops that follow these keynote remarks, we'll explore the specific issues of uranium extraction, uranium enrichment, industrial applications for nuclear energy, high-assay low-enriched uranium, or HALEU fuels, and space applications. I don't plan to replow the ground covered in days 1 and 2, but I think it'll be useful to summarize a few key points about where we have been and where we may be headed before launching into today's topics. Please feel free to provide questions and comments via the Q&A function. I plan to spend the last portion of my time addressing them. As you are most likely aware, and as Dan reminded us, the military applications of splitting atoms were at the forefront in the 1940s, but interest in peaceful applications did not lag far behind. President Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace speech to the United Nations General Assembly in 1953 laid out a vision for addressing the needs of agriculture, medicine, and other peaceful activities, with special focus on providing, quote, abundant electrical energy in the power-starved areas of the world, unquote. Nuclear weapon stockpiles continued to grow through the 1980s, but the nuclear nonproliferation framework has been generally successful in limiting the possession of nuclear weapons to a small number of countries. Nuclear power applications, chiefly the production of electricity, grew rapidly from the 1950s through the 1980s. Today, nuclear power plants produce about 20% of America's electricity and about 10% of the world's electricity supply. Electricity production is the most visible manifestation of the application of nuclear technology, but it is far from the only one. For example, most people are quite familiar with the extent to which nuclear technology is used for both diagnostic and therapeutic medical applications. Electricity is essential for public health and economic prosperity in our modern society. At first, the impetus for developing nuclear energy was to provide abundant, low-cost electricity to the world's population. With that being said, the development of nuclear energy took place during a time of increasing concern about the environmental effects associated with power production. Nuclear energy was seen as a means of avoiding harmful emissions associated with burning fossil fuels while providing energy security benefits as well. However, some environmentalists oppose nuclear energy for a variety of reasons, including concerns over nuclear safety and the growing stockpile of highly radioactive used fuel with no clear disposal pathway. In the 1820s, getting back to a little history, French mathematician and physicist Joseph Fourier postulated a greenhouse effect of the Earth's atmosphere that traps some of its energy from the sun, thereby enabling life as we know it to exist on the planet. In the 1970s, scientists realized that increasing levels of carbon dioxide and other gases produced by our industrial society could be contributing to an increase in the temperature of the Earth's biosphere over historical levels. In essence, too much of a good thing. The past 35 years have seen the development of a scientific consensus that anthropogenic or human-caused climate change is a real phenomenon, although there is still uncertainty about the magnitude of future changes, as well as disagreement over what should be done, if anything, to address it. Nevertheless, it's clear that the general desire to reduce greenhouse gas emissions has led many former opponents of nuclear energy to take another look at nuclear fission as an energy source. Natural gas dramatically extended as a power source over the past 2 decades, but natural gas is a large emitter of greenhouse gases. Clean energy sources such as solar and wind energy have grown significantly, but still produce less energy combined than does nuclear power in this country. Moreover, solar and wind power are expensive and, because they are inherently intermittent, unreliable for around-the-clock generation of power. As a result, nuclear power is getting renewed interest as an important means of moving the United States and the world toward a clean energy future. Beyond the desire for clean energy, Russia's invasion of Ukraine brought the issue of energy security back to the fore. Energy security was a major issue in the United States in the 1970s following the Arab oil embargo, but it largely faded from national consciousness after the Cold War ended in 1991 and the shale oil and gas boom of the 2000s took hold. Now the need for energy security is apparent again, particularly for European countries, realizing the acute downside of being dependent on autocratic regimes for essential fuels. Some countries see nuclear energy as a twofer because it can address environmental concerns while making the energy supply less subject to short-term disruptions. I have the privilege of serving as president of the American Nuclear Society, at least for another month, after which Dr. Stephen Arndt, one of the Day 2 speakers, will succeed me. The American Nuclear Society vision is that nuclear technology is embraced for its vital contributions to improving people's lives and preserving our planet. Part of my job as American Nuclear Society president is painting pictures for those not familiar with the profession of what those contributions may look like. For example, we look forward to a future when advanced reactors coupled with energy storage systems support a stable and reliable grid that enables larger scale energy generation from renewable sources. Those advanced reactors will also support non-electrical energy requirements such as high temperature process steam for industrial use and hydrogen generation. We envision microreactors deployed to remote regions which need affordable and reliable energy. We see space exploration made feasible by radioisotope thermal generators and compact nuclear fission power sources. We must keep in mind, however, that none of these pictures that my colleagues and I like to describe are inevitable. Like all technologies, we face challenges that must be addressed. When it comes to large-scale deployment of nuclear technology, and in particular nuclear energy, I believe those challenges boil down to two things: economics and public acceptance. I will address each one in turn. Regarding economics, it is instructive to recall that in the first decade of this century, nuclear power appeared to be poised for its first major expansion since the completion of power plants that were constructed in the 1970s and 1980s, and which still comprise the vast majority of the current US reactor fleet. Coal was the predominant fuel source for electricity at the time, but environmental concerns with coal were mounting. Nuclear power plants were operating well, and new standardized large light water reactor designs were touted as a means of achieving cost-effective deployment. Order books began to fill as designers strove to get Nuclear Regulatory Commission, or NRC, pre-approval for their plants. However, a new competitor came out of nowhere: natural gas. For years, natural gas was dismissed as a large-scale power source due to limited supplies and price volatility. However, the shale gas revolution changed all that, and as the price of natural gas plummeted and stayed low, high-efficiency combined cycle gas plants began to gobble up the new generation market. U.S. regulatory approvals of new power plant designs took many years, and projects begun overseas experienced cost overruns and schedule delays. The Great Recession of 2008 delayed the need for new electricity generation. The Vogtle 3 and 4 reactors will enter service shortly, but it appears they'll be the only two planned large new light water reactors that will be completed. Moreover, cancellation of the summer project, coupled with delays and cost overruns at Vogtle, make it highly unlikely that large light water reactors will be built in the US anytime soon. New reactor interest in the US has shifted to new plant designs. There are a number of light water small modular reactors on the drawing boards at various stages of development. These include the NuScale reactor, which attained a design certification from the NRC, the Holtec SMR 160, and the General Electric BWRX 300. Light water small modular reactors expect to take advantage of factory production to reduce construction costs. They also have inherent safety features to simplify the design and thereby lower construction and operating costs. While significant departures from current light water reactors in terms of size and other aspects, these new reactors remain light water cooled and moderated, and can be considered evolutions of the light water reactor designs that constitute the current US reactor fleet. Advanced non-light water reactors, on the other hand, are most definitely revolutionary designs. They use different coolants than light water, such as helium gas, liquid metal, for example, sodium and lead, and molten salts. These coolants enable these reactors to reach much higher temperatures than light water reactors without requiring the high pressure coolant system and safety systems that drive light water reactor costs up. High temperatures result in more efficient electricity generation and enable the reactors to produce high quality processed steam for industrial applications as well as electricity production. These advanced reactors feature different fuel types that, when coupled with inherent and passive safety features, ensure adequate safety without complicated, expensive to build and maintain safety systems. Some, like light water small modular reactors, are designed to take advantage of factory production techniques. The advanced reactor designers are striving to take advantage of these attributes to lower construction costs to the point that reactors can be constructed at a reasonable cost that is competitive with other electricity generation options. However, the experience base behind advanced reactors is much less expensive than that of light water reactors. Because the advanced reactors have a lower technology readiness level, or TRL, there is great uncertainty about the ultimate cost of advanced reactor designs. Lack of full technology maturity in some areas could lead to unexpected surprises during development and deployment, which translate into delays and higher costs. Many reactor developers are working with the Department of Energy, or DOE, through the Gateway for Accelerated Innovation in Nuclear, or GAIN initiative, to ameliorate such risks, and research and prototype facilities will also help toward that end. As part of the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program, DOE is co-funding the development of 2 advanced reactor designs with the goal of deploying them by 2027. DOE has also funded significant portions of the design certification of the NuScale small modular reactor. However, the economics of small modular reactors and advanced reactors have yet to be demonstrated. The problems that afflicted the Summer and Vogtle large light water reactor projects and led to large cost overruns certainly have the potential to impact a small modular reactor or advanced reactor project as well. Utilities and other power generating companies, potential customers of small modular reactors and advanced reactors, are well aware of that fact and are looking for convincing evidence they can procure such reactors at a reasonable cost before committing to purchases. The cost to construct and operate power plants is affected by more than TRL, project management expertise, commodity prices, and labor rates. Government policy has a major impact as well, and right now it is acting to the detriment of new nuclear power plant construction. The federal government established lucrative temporary production tax credits and investment tax credits that benefit wind energy and solar energy. Instituted decades ago when renewable energy was in its infancy, the programs persist today and are always extended. The effect is to skew the energy markets by favoring certain types of clean energy over other types. The American Nuclear Society supports technology neutral incentives for clean energy. There is no defensible rationale for favoring one clean energy technology over another if addressing climate change is truly the goal. Solar and wind energy also have the advantage that some state governments are mandating that regulated utilities use increasing amounts of renewable energy sources. By picking technologies by fiat rather than by price and dependability, such measures work to disincentivize other sources of energy, including nuclear power. Moreover, because renewable energy sources are intermittent and cannot be counted on at times of peak demand and/or low supply, such set-asides will ultimately adversely impact the reliability of the electric grid. I believe wind energy and solar energy have a key role to play in our clean energy future, but the time has passed for the subsidies and set-asides they received when they were in their technological infancy. Many economists agree that the most effective measure government could take to reduce greenhouse gas emissions would be to tax those emissions. A carbon tax would be technology neutral and, if properly applied, would enable a transition to a clean energy economy in the most efficient manner. So far, most policy measures to address climate change have been aimed at the electricity generating sector. However, a carbon tax could be applied to all sectors of the economy, including those such as transportation and manufacturing, in an equitable manner. In terms of direct impact on new generation, a carbon tax would help clean energy technologies such as solar, wind, and nuclear energy compete with natural gas electricity generation. Obviously, the politics associated with the carbon tax are challenging and currently prohibitive. However, addressing climate change will be hard, and it's undesirable to dismiss out of hand what may be the optimal approach. There are certainly other factors that have the potential to affect the cost of nuclear energy. Nuclear fuel cost is an example. There must be an affordable supply of uranium and associated services, conversion, enrichment, and fabrication. Plutonium bred from uranium-235 and uranium-233 bred from thorium are other potential fuel sources, but those are not likely to impact the short-term viability of expanded nuclear power use. Regulatory predictability is another factor that can impact costs through schedule delays and uncertainty. NRC licensing should be a solvable problem, and the NRC is working to establish an improved licensing framework for advanced reactors. National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, delays are a consideration for any major government license activity. NEPA is already the favorite opposition tool of extreme environmentalists who oppose projects like nuclear power plants. Actions to further expand the scope of NEPA should carefully weigh the real benefits of such measures against the inevitable potential for mischief and interminable delay. To conclude the discussion of economics, reactor designers are attempting to reduce costs using innovative technology and improve manufacturing approaches. It remains to be seen how effective these changes will be in addressing the cost overruns and schedule delays experienced by many nuclear projects over the past 2 decades. From a policy perspective, the federal government is pursuing clean energy using incentives for favored technologies rather than a technology neutral set of incentives for clean energy and disincentives for technologies that result in the generation and release of greenhouse gases. Unfortunately, these current federal policies, coupled with requirements in some states that mandate the use of favored renewable energy technologies, act as a disincentive to nuclear power. Fortunately, there is a growing appreciation among policymakers of the value of nuclear energy when it comes to achieving clean energy goals in a practical manner. Now I turn to the issue of public acceptance, which I consider to be overblown as an impediment to nuclear technology. A 2019 public opinion poll found that more than 60% of Americans personally favor nuclear energy, 75% support license renewal for nuclear power plants, and 70% that continue to meet federal safety standards, and 55% agree that more nuclear power plants should be built in the future. The numbers have been improving since the 2011 Fukushima accident, and as the essential role of nuclear power in addressing climate change is better appreciated. Of course, there will always be opponents of any beneficial use of nuclear technology, but such viewpoints are increasingly seen as out of touch, particularly by younger Americans who welcome technological innovation. It should be noted that nationwide, numbers mask the regional reality that opposition to nuclear energy is concentrated in the Northeast and the coastal western regions of the country. Even in California, politicians are having second thoughts about the wisdom of shutting down their last nuclear power plant, an action that would run counter to the state's aggressive clean energy goals. The trend in this country is clearly towards growing public acceptance of nuclear energy. Public opinion polling also provides the insight that the more informed people feel, the more they favor nuclear energy. With support from DOE, the American Nuclear Society worked with Discovery Education to develop Navigating Nuclear, a program that provides a factual, accessible curriculum on nuclear science for K through 12 students. Navigating Nuclear has already reached millions of students, and efforts like these need to continue to ensure that Americans have the information they need to make informed decisions about their energy future. The issue of nuclear waste is often cited with justification as the primary public concern associated with nuclear power in the United States today. It is a favorite topic of anti-nuclear groups who oppose any proposal that would lead to a nuclear permanent disposal facility for used nuclear fuel and high-level radioactive waste, while at the same time decrying the lack of a permanent disposal facility for used fuel and high-level radioactive waste. While opponents may claim you can't manage your waste, the fact of the matter is the commercial nuclear power industry has been doing so safely, securely, and economically for the past 60 years. The volume of used fuel is small compared to the energy it produces, and the technology for storing, transporting, and disposing of it is well understood. Used fuel is stored on reactor sites, first in large pools of water, and then after most of the radioactivity has decayed away, in dry storage systems that require no electrical power or intervention to maintain the used fuel in a safe state. No member of the public has ever been harmed as a result of radiation released from used fuel during storage and transportation. After an extensive evaluation, the NRC concluded in its continued storage rule that used fuel can be stored safely and securely indefinitely at nuclear power plants. That is not to say we should continue to store used fuel on existing sites forever. It is a fact that the government's failure to develop a permanent disposal facility for commercial and government-owned used fuel and high-level radioactive waste is a national embarrassment. Other countries like Finland, Sweden, and Canada are proceeding with the development of geologic repositories. In contrast, the US government wasted more than $10 billion on a repository at Yucca Mountain, Nevada. The NRC found the Yucca Mountain repository could meet the applicable health and safety standards, and the local community, Nye County, Nevada, favors the project. But the US Congress will not fund the completion of Yucca Mountain, nor will Congress change current federal law that precludes consideration of any other site for a geologic repository. Despite the fact that Congress continues to abrogate its responsibilities in this area, it is encouraging that technological innovation continues in used fuel and high-level radioactive waste management. The Deep Isolation Company is developing an approach to material disposal using deep boreholes and directional drilling technology. New reprocessing and recycling technologies have the potential to change the nature of the waste management for advanced reactors, but they are unlikely to have an impact on the large and growing inventory of light water used fuel, at least in the short term. In summary, while the country should be moving into development of one or more geologic repositories for waste disposal, it is not doing so for political reasons. However, that fact should not stand in the way of nuclear power development. Nuclear technology advocates should not take public acceptance for granted, but it is now at historically high levels. Growing numbers of people in policymaking positions and the population at large appreciate the vital role of nuclear energy as part of our clean energy future and understand that there are practical limits to the extent that greenhouse gas emissions can be addressed solely through renewable energy and energy storage. I now conclude my prepared remarks. I've tried to address the breadth and depth of America's nuclear future and discuss some of the challenges faced in making societally beneficial nuclear outcomes come to pass. I appreciate your attention, and I look forward to addressing any comments or questions that you may have.
Thank you, Steve. There are a few questions. The first one, you just touched on it, but it is that subject that people really don't want to talk about much, which is waste. Can the U.S. deploy new advanced reactors without a permanent resolution to its used nuclear fuel issue?
The answer to the question is yes. We have demonstrated with light water reactor fuel that we can safely store the material indefinitely. We can do the same thing with advanced reactors. Advanced reactors present different challenges, technical challenges, because the fuel is different. And there's an ongoing National Academy of Sciences study that's looking at advanced reactors and the fuel cycle, and hopefully will be coming out with its report in sometime this year. But the general answer to the question is yes. But I reiterate that just because you can do something doesn't mean you should just go down that pathway. I think we need to be doing two things. One is we need to be developing advanced nuclear energy systems as part of our path to a clean energy future, addressing issues such as climate change, but not exclusively that, also energy security. But at the same time, we need to be working on the ultimate solution to nuclear waste ourselves and not kick the can down the road to our children and grandchildren. Whatever approach you have to generating nuclear fuel, generating nuclear power, you're going to have some waste that you have to ultimately dispose of. And the technology is well known, and we should grapple with the political issues and get moving on those.
Very good. And here's a question that relates to the panel I moderated yesterday on the supply chain. How can the U.S. compete in the nuclear reactor market? The U.S. compete when it does not have the capability to manufacture large components such as reactor vessels, the reactor pressure vessels, and not likely to be cost competitive, I guess, on the international market?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think, but I don't view being competitive as meaning that the U.S. has to sell all of the reactors and they have to manufacture all the components. I think we have a truly global nuclear supply chain market, and we have success stories. So I'll point to the Baraka plant in the UAE, which has been a real success story in terms of deploying new large light water reactors. So what technology got deployed there? Well, it was Korea was the company that supplied the reactor to the Emiratis, but they used a technology that was based on basically old combustion engineering technology that evolved into Westinghouse technology. And significant portions of the plant were supplied from US companies. So I think that we will continue to work in conjunction with democratic nations that have nuclear supply capability and address the world's energy problems that way. I recently attended the International Atomic Energy Agency General Conference. It was actually September of last year. And I had a lot of discussions with what you call nuclear newcomer nations, and they are all very interested in nuclear technology. With US technology, they view the US as a reliable supplier. With that being said, we need to get our game together better in the US so that we can marshal our capitalist approach to an economy and be a dependable supplier nation, working in concert with the government and with allies abroad.
Very good. It's a great insight. Another question, recognizing that standardization is critical to successful nuclear reactor deployment and operation, how many standard, quote unquote, nuclear reactor designs can be cost effective?
Yeah, I'm going to be a heretic here. I know that standardization has always been a goal. If you look at some successful nuclear programs in, for example, France, they achieved a lot of low-cost construction and deployment by following a standardized approach. But I think people have to go to their strengths, and the strengths of America is innovation, and it's that we don't all do the same thing, and we try to find the best way of approaching issues. Now we went a little overboard in the 1970s and the 1980s, and we ended up with each nuclear power plant being a sort of a plant unto itself. We need to do better than that. But I think we're at the current stage where we are right now. We need to let innovation play out and see which designs are actually optimal for the energy challenges that face us. And I mean designs because I don't think it's going to be a one size fits all. So I'm not as I think we have to let things play out for a while longer. And when you get a couple of successful designs out there, the standardization will take place, because I do think that we have learned the lesson that we don't want to repeat the mistakes of the 70s and the 80s.
Yeah. I don't think that's being a heretic at all. It's very sound. We have a couple of more questions. I'll go with this. Global trade has placed a great demand on Maritime's energy needs, which nuclear could meet. What efforts are needed to meet Maritime's growing need for carbon-free energy?
That's a great question, because it kind of opens up the field to the fact that, what we've been looking at over the last 20 years, we focus on electricity generation. We need to decarbonize. We need to get electricity decarbonized. Well, it's just one of many things that we currently use that result in emissions of greenhouse gases. So we need to look elsewhere. Now, people are probably aware there have actually been a few commercial cargo ships developed with nuclear power. In the US, it was the USS Savannah. And there was the Otto Hahn from Germany as well. But they've never really been cost effective. And I think that's ultimately where we're going to go. So we've got a big sector of the US nuclear energy development program right now is in small modular reactors and in micro reactors. And these are reactor concepts that should be amenable to use on commercial transport vessels. So the question will come down to money. And I don't know the answer to that question, but I think that the way that the development is going now with these smaller reactors will hopefully enable them to play a role with maritime transportation in the future.
Great. I thank Ben Cross for that question. Question from Ed Key. Will ANS engage in the debate about closure of Diablo Canyon in 2024, 2025? If yes, what will ANS do?
All these smart people are asking me questions. It's unfair. So Ben and Ed, thank you for that. We will, and we are already. Of course, ANS is a professional society, nationwide, actually worldwide professional society. But we look at what's going on at Diablo Canyon and we just shake our heads because it is so nonsensical for the state of California to shut down its largest clean energy power plant, while at the same time talking about how it wants to be, carbon free. Well, the reality is that when you shut down Diablo Canyon, you're going to be importing energy from fossil fuel power plants in other parts of the West to replace it. Does that make any sense? Especially when you consider Diablo Canyon is a great nuclear power plant. It is modern, it's upgraded, it could run for many more years, and we want to see that happen. So we are working with groups in California to try to amplify their voice, if you will, because there's a lot of people in California that really don't want to see this come to play. And we're actually going to be out there in California in June for our annual meeting. And I hope we have a lot to say about that particular subject at that time.
Great. Thank you. One final question, if I could. This goes back to something from day one of the conference. One of the speakers, Fiona Riley, mentioned how difficult it was for her in the nuclear industry early on when she would go to meetings, there'd be 20 people at the meeting and she would be the only woman. I'd like to ask your perspective on how we get more diversity into the nuclear energy industry.
Well, it's happening, and it's a natural evolution. You don't go from 0 to 60 in 0 seconds. It takes a little while. But gosh, I look around me. We had our election for the board of directors for ANS recently, and 3 out of the 4 winning candidates for seats on the board were women. I went to the student conference at University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana, just last month, and there's so many folks, so many women, growing numbers of minority students there. So it's happening, and it's going to continue to happen. And I'll say one thing that I think is that, we don't have a perfect society in terms of, the U.S. and the world, and American nuclear society isn't perfect either, but the nuclear field is really a meritocracy. Once you get into it, people don't care what color your skin is or what sex you happen to be or, gender or whatever. People care about what you do and what you accomplish. By and large, like I said, we're not perfectly there yet, but we're getting there. And I think, we look at Katie Huff, the Assistant Secretary for Nuclear Energy at DOE, and Secretary of Energy Granholm. I mean, I just think I think it's a cup that's far more than half full, and I think it's going to be full in no time.
Thank you for that perspective.
I'd like to thank you both. We are out of time, but this has really been a stimulating discussion. And as usual, Dan, you've done a wonderful job moderating. Steve, I really appreciate your thoughts and such clear-sighted vision for where we need to go and the issues that need to be addressed. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve.
Mm-hmm.